was my grandmother. I knew her for almost 9 years. She lived in St. Cloud after she left Gordon Township, just down the road from us during the last 7 years of her life. I knew her as a grandmother during her lifetime, but during this last year I got to know her in many different ways. How she was as an aunt to many people, a friend to many people. And anyway, as a grandchild, it was always fun to visit her, especially in the summer, when my sisters and I packed our little suitcases and stayed overnight at her house. This was a distance of about 2 blocks away from our house. She always sang with us, and she taught us many American folk songs in the early 1950s. She had a little red book called America Sings, and she herself was a high soprano, I've been told. And she would sing with us and taught us such songs then as Grandfather's Clock, Three Blind Mice, Red River Valley, Old Black Joe, She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, Oh My Darling Clementine, and Old MacDonald Had a Farm. We also spent our early Christmas Eve with her at her house in St. Cloud. And I have some very special memories of that because it was where I first heard the Christmas story right from the Gospel of Luke. Anna had an identical twin sister named Karen. In this last year, as I've been reading about Anna and examining photographs with magnifying lenses and just trying to learn about her life, it's been fun for me to imagine what Karen might have been like. But of course, she died in Norway at the tender age of 2. My mother has a remembrance of hers. It's a little hand-carved wooden chest, and it's from Norway, and it has the letters KKD etched on the front, and that stands for Karen Klukk's daughter. It was pre-1900. And I did bring it with me, so if somebody would like to see it when I was here tomorrow, it's a treasure. Juliana married Peter Johnson, whose parents immigrated from Stordal, Norway, and he was a skilled carpenter and building contractor, and he built many grain elevators in North Dakota, Montana, and Saskatchewan. Grain elevators, of course, revolutionized the growing and shipping of grain in America and linked farm communities to big grain trading centers. This was, of course, long ago before the days of the internet. Peter was among the millions of young people at that time who died from the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. At this time, they didn't have the virus theory of disease. And so he died. He left Anna and her 3-year-old daughter, Myrtle, who was the first of the Klukken grandchildren. Many of you probably knew Gust Moen, who and Juliana married 5 years after Peter's death. He was a grandfather to my sister and to me. He made wooden cradles for our dolls, and he made our first skis. And in case some of you have never seen what homemade wooden skis look like, these were the skis that Gus Moen made for me when I was a little kid. These skis made many trips down a huge drift of snow on our backyard shed that we called Sugarcane Mountain Drive. I think it's fair to say that the skiing habit has been passed on to my children and probably will be passed on to their children as well. The skis that I have now are long, and they were made in Norway. They're only about 25 years old, but if I go out on the ski trails with them, people will stop and look at them like they're antiques because they just seem like, they're very old compared to what is being made nowadays. But they have some stickers on them from some ski races in one of Oslo, which is Swedish, but skiing nonetheless. Oscar Holmes was not a Klukken, but he was married to one. He was married to Anna's daughter, Myrtle. He enjoyed visiting Anna and Gus' farm, helping with the farm chores. He especially loved tending the horses, bathing them, currying them, and seeing that they were fed. He was very fond of the horses. And then Ray Brooke is another person I would like to have remember. He also was not a Klukken, but he married Anna's other daughter, Gudrun. He was a special uncle. He just lived down the road from us because he lived in Anna's house after she passed away. And that's where my cousins, of course, grew up. He could drive to Red Lodge, Montana on a long weekend and bring fresh venison home to share with us. Like Oscar, he wasn't Norwegian, but he loved the outdoors. He was an outstanding fisherman, and he treated us to lots of fresh fish from Lake Mercedes. He and his family lived in Westinghouse, St. North home for many years.
I think as many as possible should talk to her. She's very interested in the family history. And if you have any insights, she'd love to hear from you. Maybe carry a paperwork. She's very interested. Thank you, Rosemary. That was very nice. Another song. Now this song here, My Heart is Longing for Christ my Savior, this, and I didn't know this until I got this information from Rosemary. Grandma Klukken, it was one of her favorite songs. And from Myrtle's writings, Grandma used to hum this piece of music. So I think it's fitting that we sing this. Now there are 7 verses. We're not going to sing 7 verses. Somebody told me earlier they want to get out of here. So no, we're not going to sing 7 verses. How about 3? Is that okay? 3. We come now to Uncle Olaus, and I turn over the proceedings to the cousin Margaret.
I wonder what Grandpa would say. He saw this in 100 years. I shouldn't say hers, this crowd. It's tremendous. Now I just want to talk about Olaus and Dick. And they Dad came over. When Grandpa came, he was 8 years old. And he was put to work, helped build houses, worked the fields and farm. After a while, he was able to go and do work for the neighbors. He was building houses. Well, as time went on, he got to the point where he decided he was going to buy a Model T Ford. that was a rare thing to do. In fact, he was the first one in the area that bought a Model T Ford, the 1917 model, as I understand. And everybody around that people wanted to ride in that Ford. Especially all the ladies wanted to ride to the ladies' inn. And of course, in time that mom and pop was pretty young girl. I was spending our family. We were also Norwegians from Norway. I'm sort of purebred. But anyway, they married. First thing that happened after they were married, Dad got appendicitis. And they had quite a time because there were no doctors around. And I don't know the whole story, but somehow or another, he never did have his appendix removed. Well, he finally got through that era, and he started to set up farming. Well, it was on Merle Johnson's farm. As I understand, it was a piece of property. He rented that for a few years, but he was very ambitious and wanted to do a lot of stuff. And he decided he was going to make some egg crates. You remember those egg crates he used to have years ago? Well, he had to rip some loader. Well, what he had was I think it was a 24-inch saw, long saw, and a 3-horse Cascade engine. He had that hooked up and was going to rip the board. Well, that went fine for a while. All of a sudden, the little stick got caught in the feed the saw and the frame. He was going to take that out of there. Well, he never did get the stick out of there, but he lost his right half. I put it off right in here. I don't know how the guy ever got along without his feet. Anyway, following all that, there was following up about a bunch of kids. I started the parade. None with Beulah, Helen, Violet. And you see, there's all 3 girls here that after me. I didn't even have a brother. I had to play house with the girls. So all of a sudden, we had twins. One was a brother. Well, that was quite a relief. They had a twin and a girl, too. That was the one. Well, poor Dolores was only a little bit of a girl, about 3 pounds. Can you imagine a 3-pound girl out on a farm, not survived? That to me is one of the greatest miracles in a family. Following the twins, Donald came, and then Violet. Well, before the first. Donald and Betty. Well, I can tell you a few stories about Betty. She wanted to come to Rockford because that's where I had stayed myself. And Mom thought it was a good idea because then I could watch over her. For a supervisor. And I could that did. She met up with a Swede. Wow, I don't need to be hard on Bobby. He turned out to be a pretty good guy. My other was a brother-in-law. Then we had one more child, Billy. And he had to come around at a terrible time. First of all, we had a terrible snowstorm in the area, so you couldn't get anywhere except fly, and we didn't have wings. doctor come over, I guess, I didn't know about it. But anyway, along with the snowstorm, we had started here. Now we had to fumigate the bedroom. And a neighbor's lady came over, crawled through the bedroom window to get into the room to be with my mother. So I did it.
We came up from Sunday school. All those boys would sit over here. All the girls were over there. They were doing that thing. We were all over here. And I remember very well, it was David sitting there, Virgil, Leroy, Lloyd, Lee, Donald was sitting there, and several others, Wallace Andrews, and I suppose, and various and sundry other persons sitting there. And you remember Grandpa did not tolerate a great deal of frivolity or nonsense. And of course, sometimes we would have these Norwegian services. I don't know, every third Sunday or whatever it was. Well, Reverend Hagen probably was up here going over his sermon, and those of you that remember him, sometimes he tended to elongate the sermon. Am I right? Well, a group of young boys sitting over in the side here, we tended to get a little bit antsy, I suppose, and we're thinking about food mother had to be up or whatever it might be. But there just so happened, and I suppose I should leave this particular miscreant or this individual nameless, but there was something going on, and Grandpa gets up out of his chair, walks over there, grabs him by the ear, pulls him out, takes him back there, and he comes back and sits down, and ultimately the other person comes to sit. This is a true story. I remember very well. Well, now we get to Bernard. There isn't a great deal. Bernard passed away, I think, 1960. And he was a single man all his life. He lived a large part of it in Chicago. And he worked as, correct me if I'm wrong, night watchman, something to that effect. And he had an apartment dwelling. I don't know who it was that went there and visited him, and he had made a big kettle of soup. And he had various people come in and eat from that soup kettle. So Bernard was a many-faceted person. Very generous, he was kind, very kind, and very talented, very talented. And there's a place in his honor in the basement, and I think it's in the reminder there's some roses there. It's great. Also, I want to mention something about Bernard. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, Ole Olson came upon a letter in the attic of his house. And it was a letter that was written by our Uncle Bernard to Marius Olson. They were good friends. This letter was very, very long, and it was written in Norwegian. Well, Uncle Elvin was kind enough to translate that letter. And it's an amazing piece of work. He says a lot about himself. Bernard has written to Marius about an incident where he's trying to gain some recompense for an injury or whatever. But in that letter, he talks something about his wartime experience. That letter has been typed up, and Elvin's comments are in there, and very poignant. So if you have a chance, an opportunity, is it down in the basement? I have some, but I don't have it here. But if you have an opportunity to read that letter of Bernard to Marius Olson, get an insight into what Bernard. It's incredible. It's fascinating. He's quite a guy. He really was. I know as a kid that we always look forward to him coming home from Chicago. Sometimes he'd come like a dog. Remember that dog he brought? Little Ford pickup, not pickup, Coops. Yeah. Wonderful man. Wonderful. Yeah, no.
This picture of his dog got like this model.
Yes. I remember. Well, there's much to be said about Vern as there is about all these people. We are their legacy, of course. And, appreciate it. Now we come to Uncle Carl Martin.
Hi, I'm Sherry. I'm Martin's granddaughter. I live in Grand Forks. Values you have today come from way back. I remember my grandpa, he was extremely hardworking. And I know that now as an adult, probably more than I did as a child. But it seemed like he always was active in many things. He was a mechanic, he was a farmer, and he was a business owner. And I remember running down the aisles in the stores that he had in Williston. Grandpa, as he became older, he had a more relaxed time in his later years. He joined the 6th Infantry as a scout, and he participated in their many functions. He passed away in 1979. He married Ida Clausen in 1927. My mom told me a story about how Grandma went and bought a dress for one of the girls one time, and then she came home and she sewed the exact same dress in a different color. Their son, their only son, Sonny, was very special to everyone. He played trombone in the high school band. During his high school years, he worked at the grocery store, and after high school, he was in the state highway department. The caption under his picture in the high school yearbook reads, "He's a boy that should give the girls a break, but doesn't." He passed away in 1997.
Well, now we come down to the last two. They were born in the United States. Oswald and Elvin. And Orville's going to make some comments, remarks about Oswald. And it's always nice to see Orville. If there's anybody in the world that I have been close to, it's Orville over the years, although I haven't glad to see her back. She went to a reunion last night, class reunion. She hadn't gone for 50 years. Of course, she hadn't been. I'm glad you're over. Turn it over to you. I borrowed a lot of typing paper from Marvel when I was in high school. Thank you. Yeah,
He was the one of us that wasn't a bit stuffy, not that old. He could get by with everything and try it. Well, I have missed an awful lot of the Klukken get-togethers from my young days living on the home farm. We did get the privilege of the visits, being present at the visits of the brothers. They would come over to the home farms and they would tell all these wonderful stories that they knew about everybody and everything, and they would laugh. They laughed and they laughed and they laughed. Of course, I don't remember those stories, and it's probably just as well. But it was always also the gathering place of a lot of the cousins, the brothers, the family in general. As they came, they'd stop at the home place. And of course, the grandparents lived there until their death, Oli and Bentina. And I learned to speak Norwegian. That's what we had to talk to them. And it even stood me in good stead with when, much later, in 1973, we stopped in Norway on our way home from Chad. And we got up to Verdal. Things worked out very well. We had to sell our Air France ticket in order to go up to Norway, and then changed it for Scandinavian Airlines to get back here. But anyway, in visiting with Dad's cousins, who were still living at that time, many of them were unmarried, they hadn't had families of their own, and visiting with one of his cousins, I was trying to communicate with her using that Norwegian that I was always very suspect, because in Africa, when I had talked to people of Norwegian background, other missionaries, they came from southern Norway. And I began to suspect that maybe my Norwegian was baby talk, you know, because my grandparents died when I was about 5 years old, 4 and 5 years old. Anyway, we went on that trip, got up there into the real valley, you know, where our forebears really did come from. And I had to use this Norwegian because, except for the very younger people then, they did not speak English. So I had to try out my Norwegian. And anyway, I remember this one cousin. She would listen to me, and then she'd take her apron and pull it up over her head, and she would laugh. And she'd said, "You sound just like we used to talk." That was okay, because after all, Norwegian had changed, and I had retained what I had learned from my grandparents. And it did work out, so we got quite a bit of information and had a wonderful visit, and our children will never forget it. Of course, when these things were going on and we were in Africa, we missed out on a lot of the activity that was going here. But we were back here in 1968 for the great big reunion. And there were about 150 of us present at that time. We had an African pastor with us that was going to work on translation with us when we were here, and he was really impressed. He always thought that missionaries were these people that came to Africa or someplace else because, you know, they're kind of loners and they didn't have anybody. So that was really, you know, quite a boost to us that he saw these 150 people gathered. It was also a boost to our children when at that same time there was the 50th anniversary of John and Helga. And so that Sunday afternoon we gathered here in this church, and all the descendants of John and Helga were seated here in this center section of the church, and most of the rest of us were up in the balcony. And my children were in 7th grade and 5th grade and kindergarten at that time. We had just come back from Africa for our leave, and they looked down on this group, and I said, you know, they're all relatives. They were fascinated too, because out there, you know, they didn't really belong to anybody. Everybody else was African. And so that was a great boost to them, to have all these relatives back here. It has its good points, you know. I have many good memories. And lots of you are good writers and present cards and all that sort of thing. Now I'll just give a little history. I am Orpha, the second daughter of Oswald and Gunda Klukken. We were 5 daughters. People would always commiserate with my father that he didn't have any sons. Oh, he didn't like that bother him. He said, all the sons will come along sooner or later, and he did. To those 5 daughters were born 22 grandchildren and 37 great-grandchildren. I will report those that have passed on. First was Emily Ann Larson, the infant daughter of Sheldon and Julie. That was in 1984. Then my mother, Gunda, died in 1984. My dad in 1986. Just a few weeks actually after the time that we had spent our parole living with him. That was a very interesting time because, you know, like most Norwegians, they don't usually say so very much about their emotions, and and their feelings. And though I was sure that my father and mother loved each other very much, there wasn't really very much demonstration of it before us. But when we lived with Dad on that furlough, why, he was just full of stories. Their courtship, how he got his eye on this girl when he was in confirmation class, because he and her brother were the only ones, and he saw this girl who was 12 and he was 14, and that was the only girl for him. Well, he was had the difficulty of having polio at age 18, but one of the big spots about that he remembered was when Gunda's parents hitched up the horse and buggy and came to visit him after he had been brought back from North Dakota. And he said, you know, they wouldn't have had to do that. No one knew what would be the outcome of a life for someone who had polio. But that was something that he really treasured. And of course, they were married in 1929. And these 5 daughters came into the world. Actually, we have been spared much of suffering in our family. Very little, we would say, of sickness and troubles of that kind. So there was that infant daughter, Gunda, Oswald, then the son-in-law, husband of Elmer, Lauren Larson, died on October 1995. And then, now, just in 1999, November 18th, Vernon Edlund, husband of Luke. We have been a close family, a loving family. As we were looking over some old things now, we found a picture that was a gift of my father to my mother on their wedding day. At least that date is marked on the back of it. And I'll just read you that little poem before we proceed. You'll find wherever you roam that marble floors and gilded walls can never make a home. But every house where love abides and friendship is gift is surely home and home sweet home. For there the heart can rest by Henry Van Dyke. Our home was a home in which there was much music. My dad played the organ here in church for years and years, and he practiced every Sunday morning. And also, any time that we got into the car and went anywhere, we sang all the way. All these songs, all these hymns, all kinds of songs, whether from the songbook from grade school or whatever, we sang. And that, I think, is a heritage that has been shared by all of us in the family, or very many of us. This afternoon, we are going to sing a song that actually was rather new to me because I was not here when this tradition started. I was not here in the States, but it has come to mean very much to the Oswald Klukken family. And that was a song that's based on Psalm 100. As I understand it, Dad wrote the music, and then Elvin, his brother Elvin, fitted the words to that. Now, we in Oswald Klukken's family are going to sing that song through once, and then we will ask the rest of you to join us. I think some of you know it much better than I. But anyway, and the organ, I understand, the old organ, will be played by Cindy, granddaughter of Oswald, and the great-granddaughter of Elvin will play the violin in accompaniment as we sing. And the words will be up here on the overhead, and we'll sing it through once, the Oswald Klukken descendants, and then all of you can join us in singing it over again.
Esther, Marilyn, Dorothy, Joyce, and Dan. I feel very privileged to comment about Eldon, a wonderful man. About Lily, his wife, a wonderful woman. About Eldon and Louis, blessed be their memory. for just a few moments, briefly, I'd like to share about the travels of Elvin's violin. Many of you have heard him play. The first time I did, I was enthralled, moved by the sound. A teacher of a great-granddaughter, Audrey Sykes, who now plays the violin, said that most likely could be figured out it was made in Pennsylvania. When Elvin was in his 20s, at the cost of anywhere from $20 to $40, he purchased the violin by mail catalog. And then he received by mail lessons and taught himself how to play. He did very, very well. The violin was here with Elvin for many years. Then it was in the possession of Dan, Imperial Cichus, and then it traveled to Kingston, Washington, near Seattle, in the possession of Maryland. I picked up an interest in this violin, which I've had for years. And yesterday, my granddaughter was taking violin lessons, and Marilyn graciously offered the violin to Audrey Sykes to play. Just a few months ago, it was sent to Salt Lake City, Utah, where it was evaluated and refurbished, that word, restored. Got good help here. Restored. It is in the height of good condition. I've heard the comments of a few people who know violins, been Audrey's teachers, that it's a good one, a very good quality instrument. Not necessarily in monetary value, but in tone, quality, and as a violin. I'm very, very happy for the family of Elvin, a tribute to him, that this afternoon the sound of the violin will be shared. Audrey Sykes of Racine, Wisconsin, the great-granddaughter, will play it for us. And we'll just let the violin speak for itself and be the ending of this tribute to Elvin.
Having just returned this week also from a trip to Norway, it would be very nice to walk under a refreshing waterfall. There is one quick story that comes to mind. Actually, with a tourist's eye in Norway, you wonder why in the world Ole and Bernie never came here. The mountains, the waterfalls, and so forth. But then you start looking at some of the farms, way up on the mountainside, a little patch of an acre, or 2 acres, or 3 acres maybe. And going down the Geiranger Fjord, they pointed out a little farm way up, hundreds of feet up on the mountainside, maybe 1,000 feet up on the mountainside, up by the Seven Sisters waterfall. And they tell the story of how the farmer and his wife, when their children went out of the house, had to tether the children so they did not fall off the mountain. There was no using tractors or anything like that. There was a lot of handwork, a lot of work. And I suspect that when they came here and saw all this flat land and the thick soil and the good rich soil, they thought they had found God's country. They were farmers, not tourists. But a quick story from the life of Ole and Bernstein that Grandpa Klukken, my Grandpa Oswald, wrote about in 1982 when he put together a little booklet for a family gathering. He recited how Ole would tell about the time that he was in the Beardall River Valley helping collect rocks from the mountainside to help shore up the riverbanks so that the flooding wouldn't be so bad. And how he was caught in the middle of a rock slide. Rocks came tumbling down the mountainside, and he was right in the middle of it. He had a big iron bar, and he and the iron bar traveled with the rocks down the mountain, and his companions came down after him, wondering how in the world he might have survived that. His iron bar was bent in a moon shape, but he wasn't bent in a moon shape himself. He survived it quite well, and told his companions that he hadn't been hurt at all. And Grandpa related how often over his lifetime he would give that story, tell that story to anyone who would listen, and cite it as an example of how God had provided for him, how God had saved his life. And I think it is that part of our family history, the spiritual life of Ole and Bernstein that they brought to this country, that we really owe them a debt of gratitude for, that we owe our Heavenly Father a debt of gratitude for, that He had moved in their lives to bring them to knowledge of salvation, and that they cared for their family in that way on the spiritual side of things also. And I trust that for all of us who are gathered here today, that is true, that we all have heard the message that God has brought to us through the Scripture of saving faith in Jesus Christ and His provision for us, and that is part of our lives, so that with our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and others who have gone before us, we can say that the Lord is our God, and we can carry that heritage on down through the generations. Let's close then with a word of prayer.
Get that back right here. Get into a shade right here. Behind the net.
Chairs aren't being used out of Hey, some of the small kids can come in the front. Kids in the front. Kids in front. Not on the floor.
Now, hurry. Sit next to Sarah. Right here.
Go for Neil. Where are you down here? Lauren, Shelby, here. Laura, okay.
One way.
Okay. You three in the back with kids, come on over to this side over here. Like the second tier.
Right.
Yeah, you're a little bit way, kind of looking a little tiny. Yeah. But don't hide behind that person. You can come out to the edge. Okay.
Still looking for a couple kids.
Okay, are we ready?
No.
No, we're waiting for somebody. Way to get back with them. Permission for them. There's something right here. Looking for the girl.
Ready?
Yep.
Where are we looking?
Gotta look at the gal with the tripod.
Right here.
Look at the middle.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Again. 1, 2, 3. You got to put your hand down. I know it's sunny. Okay, everyone look here. Don't look at her. Come on. 1, 2, 3.
Take a picture.
Okay, I don't know that I'm really good at doing
Well, that's all right.
Does it have any idiosyncrasies? Here's all ready to go.
Yours is all ready to go. Mine, you just press the button.
Kids on the ground.
No, just leave yours on normal. Do I need to back up?
This one I think you maybe do. This one, if you want to zoom in, you can do it back and forth. No, we'll just kind of leave it. Okay? Actually, Kelly, why don't you do it? I'll just try to take a couple on like that. If you want to take a couple on that one. Okay, come on, people! Everybody's getting hot here, so we gotta take some.
All right, all you people over there. Go put some clothes on.